All right, so a lot of you have joined us.
Hello.
I want to do a couple of things. This has been very, very good. We wanted to use this part to do a kickoff to a broader speak out, because there were several students who actually, your generation calls it being transformative, and maybe my generation might say, we keeping it 100%, baby. And I was going to ask Reverend Monica Cross, she's written articles for the People's Tribune, if she might come and speak to us for a moment about, as we're thinking about speaking out, how do we have a tool like we did with the Black Panther movement that teaches and takes our movement all across this country and also brings those lessons. So join me in welcoming.
And Reverend Pinckney, he and several people talk about tools. Now, we've heard today, and I think a lot of us know that we're living in difficult times of injustice. Every day you turn on the radio, you turn on whatever media you use, it's some kind of bad news. So the most recent news, of course, is the massacre of students in Florida. The youth used the AR-15 to kill students. Students like you. Right now, they're fighting tooth and nail to change the narrative about gun control. Tooth and nail to fight against injustice. The injustice that says you don't need evidence to put somebody away. The tools we need, one of these tools is the ability to speak out, to share our voice. Now, as someone who came out and I had no way, how do you express yourself when there is nobody to hear you? How do you do that? You can come to school, but you know you have issues you're really interested in. One of the tools that came up for me was the People's Tribune, which you have in your seat. You know, I think I've known Ethel for some years now. I started getting involved with the teaching committee and stuff like that. But there's need to express your voice when you see injustice. And so I had seen Reverend Pinckney's story in the People's Tribune. I was like, wow, he's really doing some really fantastic stuff. And then I was asked to write for the People's Tribune, and I was able to express my concern about health care. I mean, it's a travesty when 20 million people lose health care. It's a travesty when you see people on the street who are homeless, mostly because they had to file bankruptcy because they couldn't afford their health care expenses. So we're living in the midst of some really challenging, unjust times, and we need to share our voice. And the People's Tribune is a tool by which we can do that. Let your voice be heard. Let your voice be heard. And it's important because, I mean, up here, most of us have been around for a little bit. We've been doing a lot of things. But that next generation of folks coming along, they're going to carry the mantle forward, and that's you. And so, write some stories, contact us, contact Ethel. Yeah. People's, it's on your seats, People's Tribune. Begin to write for the People's Tribune. Get it out. Let your voice be heard because it's very much needed right now. Thank you.
Thank you. And Monica is written for that. So now let's bring this back. We only have about 10 minutes. We'd like to have a lot more, but maybe some of you have been moved. You may have questions. I've told the panelists they need to take another bite at the apple because another whole set of students have come through. But this is your time as students and community to kind of do what Keith and Stefan and Lakeisha did, as well as Brad, to talk about, and Armando, I didn't say Amado, I'm so sorry, in terms of sharing what their journey has been, but also conclusions that they're drawing, that we need to politicize this thing, y'all. You know, suffering in silence is not what we want you to take away from this. We want to break that silence on the suffering that our people have faced.
Hi, so I'm in an English class with Professor Oliver, and our whole semester is based on housing and food insecurities around the whole globe, but also mainly based in the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. And I have been homeless multiple times in my life. I'm 35, and last January was the first semester I enrolled in college full-time, and this is my goal, and I have a lot of goals. But working on this assignment has been really triggering for me. And I also don't have a car. It was a hit and run when it was parked by someone in Fruitville who, you know, took a hit of crack and did a U-turn in the street and hit multiple cars. It wasn't just mine. But so I take the bus, and I also see homelessness everywhere I go, every day. And I also don't carry cash anymore with me because I give my money away constantly, so I carry snacks. And I was doing some research for one of our papers, and I started crying, and I decided to free write. She's having us do this, and it's been very therapeutic for me. And I also go to therapy here at the school, which is a wonderful thing for us. And I wrote a poem yesterday, and I wanted to share it in class. And I was very nervous because I also didn't know how to read till I was 14. So I'm nervous speaking out publicly. But also at the end of the semester, we're going to be speaking at the quad about our topics of insecurity. So I'm like, oh, and then this is happening now, and I'm like, just do it. So I'd like to share this poem. It has some foul language.
Oh, we never heard foul language. We got a president's mouth is a toilet, so go ahead, baby. Do your thing.
Thank you. The night is young. One by one, they trickle onto the 800 bus line for warmth from the freezing night. Most have nothing but a few bags holding their last possessions, let alone the fare. Dirt underneath fingernails is the last thing on minds now, for one has shit themselves again. As the potholes rock drained eyes to sleep, a toothless man yells, "Hey driver, turn on the heat. What's wrong with you? I paid my fucking fare, bruh." "You better watch your language or you can catch the next bus," said the driver. "We need the heat, man," cried another passenger. There became silence in anticipation, hoping for warmth. Soon the sound of soft air began to blow through the vents, followed by the strong aroma of shit. But many didn't care. A sudden jerk shook the sleepers awake, and another passenger slid off her seat. The driver abruptly pulled over while trying his best to hold the puke within his mouth. He swiftly ran off the bus, spewing his faux dinner that he had earlier with his daughter for her 16th birthday. Bent over with slow twerks and loud gags, it was impossible for open eyes not to watch, for this was quite the spectacle of entertainment. With nothing left inside him but his blood, bones, and guts, he held onto his knees for support. Looking over at the crowded bus with watery eyes, he said to himself, "The night is still young, and my shift has only just begun."
So one of the things I want to make sure you take away from this day, and we only have a short amount of time, so I know it kind of gets to get your courage up, but check this out. The reason we kind of did the Poor People's Campaign from 50 years ago and the Poor People's Campaign that's being relaunched today. It's a different kind of world, but the reality is We are that wretched of the earth. A motto talked about being that blend, like my grandchildren are, and being that blend where you could be kind of any part of humanity. Well, check this out. We are that majority, but we don't have the political rights to reflect that right now. And the Poor People's Campaign that we need for today needs to secure those basic necessities. There's no reason in the world that one human being should be living on a pavement unless they want to. And right now, we know that ain't the deal. So part of what we want you to think about, Sister Lakeisha said, I like to think about solutions. So I want y'all to think about, will those solutions that we've been looking for? None of us can do this individually, but we can build from this towards a different vision. I know sometimes we all kind of get hardened. We've heard a lot of BS, and we kind of say, I've heard this before, tired politicians, and Oakland got, Lord knows, we got a whole bunch of them. I'm ready to kick the whole kitten caboodle out. But that means then what are we fighting forward for? And so I want you to think about that when we're thinking about the relaunching of this. And I think the kind of poetry and the kind of way that you challenged the last speaker, pushed herself, that she's, you got to ask yourself, how is it that the first time somebody is getting educated is in a damn jail cell? What is happening in America that that's the deal? So if we want something different, you guys, and we do, we need it. Our futures need it. We got to get busy besides just looking. They tell me how many rich black folks there are. You look in Forbes magazine, you wouldn't even think that there was a room like this. A broke black folk? But this is systemic. So what does systemic mean? Stefan said he ended up doing the wrong thing, but actually from the standpoint of the rich and elite, you did exactly what they wanted you to do. So now how do we change that script? That's what I want you to think about. And we got young people who are giving examples, y'all. They're putting it all on the line. They're learning. But these youngsters who got, what they call it? Never again movement, Rev?
Never again, no more.
Never again. Look, we could all, y'all love to do them hashtags. Counselor Lisa, I was supposed to call on you because you were supposed to be one of the health people here because you helped to try to heal us, our wounded souls and efforts, and one person the whole damn campus. All right, Ethel, shut up. You want to get invited back again? Well, Lisa, can you want to speak for a moment? But I want to make sure that some of you are quiet. We're going to have small group session after this. Maybe some of the things we've spoken to, but I'm going to each of the panelists to say sort of what's your one main thing you want them to think about. So, Lisa, I wanted to make sure, because you see our wounds and our bleeding from a lot of different angles, and I'd like you to speak to that as someone who's trying to be both a healer and provider on this campus for our students.
Well, and I know I missed a little bit of it, but there's a lot going on in our world right now. There's a lot going on in our communities, and so, we have a lot of work to do and a lot of healing to do. I have students coming in talking about all sorts of stuff. I know there's challenges with DACA right now, a lot of anxiety about, am I going to be going home? Is my dad leaving? We have a lot of folks coming over that are coming from countries that there's just a lot of stuff going on. And so I think we're all aware of that, and there's, just a lot of trauma. And so know that I'm on campus. I am one person for 11,000 students, and so I'm getting pretty booked up. But I also want to say that I'm very open. I know I have some students who are saying, hey, what else can we be doing to meet the mental health needs? Our communities are pretty impacted, so I've also had students coming who do have insurance but cannot get mental health support through their insurance. And so places are just totally overwhelmed with needs. And so I'm really open to ways that we can be creative in meeting the needs. I know there's a lot of different movements going on, and so if any of you guys have ideas of what we could be doing on campus or different outreach or groups, I'm more than happy and would love to hear thoughts and ideas of what else we could be doing. Mainly what I'm doing is one-on-one therapy. We've done some groups in the past. We'll probably be doing some workshops too. But know that I'm here and that I would love for anybody to stop by if they have any questions about services.
Hold up, excuse me for 1 second. This is a very important lady on campus. And our ASL Seed voted last week not to give her an empty room that's nobody using, that's on the 4th floor right next to her. So we're gonna bring this up again, but we want all y'all that's sitting in this room to come to the ASL Seed meeting on Thursday and tell your committee mental health is a serious problem on this campus, and we need to get that room up to Lisa so she could better help students on this campus. Because the meeting is at 12 o'clock on Thursday on the 4th floor in the conference room. We meet there every Thursday. Come there and voice your opinion and say, Lisa is helping students who one day might walk in front of a BART train, who one day might jump off a bridge. She's a very important entity on this campus because y'all here today, we are facing serious consequences. So tell your ASLC to get their act together and give her that room next to her that nobody's using.
That's what I'm talking about. So like, and this the thing, this is about that movement part. It isn't just one club or one agency. This is about building a movement toward what we need. We got another hand? Go right here.
Yes, hello everyone. My name's Anselmo Cornelius, and I'm a struggling actor. I became professional here at Laney College through the theater program, but my fight is for the community. I just recently joined a program called, it's the National Financial Literacy Campaign, and so I'm helping to fight against homelessness by showing awareness to people how to develop a system of taking care of their finances and developing a program for saving your future. I have a blue book here, and it's very valuable for the community because this is kind of like the root of the problem here, is where we, our education system is charging us so much money. Our loans, our grants, we have to pay back, and a lot of families believe that debt is okay, and living in debt is not okay. And so I'm creating a solution to where Americans can be debt-free. The campaign stands for a community of people. We're trying to take 1 million people to Washington, D.C., debt-free in 2020. And it's for real. That's what we're trying to do right now, and I think that it will be helpful for anyone who wants information about signing up. It's a program. We have scholarships that you don't, we have all these programs that people don't know about. There's $1 billion last year that wasn't used, that people it's just sitting there. And so corporations aren't telling us anything. People believe that we should be just living in debt. And I'm not living in debt. I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm trying to end this struggle, not only for myself, but for everybody. I'm not selfish. So that's my thing. I'm Anselmo Cornelius. You'll see me on television sometimes. I am really a professional actor, and I came from Laney, so I'm struggling here, and I'm trying to do something about it for the whole community. Thank you.
Loving you for that. Loving you for that. I seem to remember that there was a black man who was struggling, and hasn't he now directing something called that Panther movie? Okay, black man. Okay, I got a brother over here from ILWU Local 10, one of our co-sponsors. Who are you? Tell these, and then Felipe, please come down.
I just wanted to say thank you for hosting this. Thank you for the vision of relaunching. This woman, today I speak. I'm not ashamed of speaking. I had a problem with public speaking years ago. I met this woman when she was the executive director of Wheat. Her husband over there filming, doing his journalist thing. My sister upstairs, Denise, in the wheelchair, they like adopted me. But the thing about it is, it was on this Poor People's Campaign to indict the United States on behalf of violations, marching 400 miles to the UN. And I'm like, you expect rich people to turn over money that they owe us? Ain't gonna happen. But I participated. I actually just said I would pass out flyers. And I ended up going to Maryland, Philadelphia, meeting up. I got lost, but I found my way. Meeting up and walking 3 days. But in the Friendship or Quaker house, in a setting similar to this, I heard the young man talk, I heard the young lady talk, I heard the brother talk. I don't know how long they've been talking. But I had never talked. And she asked me in front of 400 people, well, she didn't even ask me, she just introduced and passed me the mic. But the thing, I thank Ethel, I thank this panel, I've heard about you, never met you, never knew your story. I have people in Flint that the water is contaminated. I have a person in Detroit, just got a postdoc at Wayne State. She just got a PhD in public health from UCLA. But this struggle, this audience, the fluctuation of students coming in excited me. I lived with them. I lived at my sister's house. Uncle Austin gave me a car that I didn't take care of right. I had struggles. I went through the Cisco Academy to get a CCNA, Cisco Certified Network Associate degree. I used to be an operator engineer. Today, I'm a longshoreman by the grace of God, which we hired through the lottery system. When I started with her, we was talking about just health care, universal health care, years ago, before Obamacare came up. This was a concept. We went around this country talking about the possibility of free health care. Unions, student bodies, and people was like, oh, yeah, that's some bullshit. We talked about workers' rights. I came from Peoria, Illinois. I was born there. The first place Abraham Lincoln talked about abolishing slavery. I was born in 1965. That's 52 years ago without segregation, the beginning of integration. The same place I was born at 2 years ago, they said it's worse for African Americans. Today, the ships that I unload and load, cargo ships that comes in through the bay up and down the West Coast, I am ILWU. We control the West Coast ports. 30% of the gross national product come through our shores. Everything we touch, one container employs one person in 10 different industries before it gets to the consumers. But it was the same ships today. The same way we stack them is the same way they stack my ancestors came through the Middle Passage. I am that resilient one. The possibilities is great. What you did to the A's, that ain't shit. It's a start. This room, I'm seeing the fluctuation of students, the consciousness, because before it was empty rooms. People didn't want to hear this shit. They wanted education. Best believe, I want you to get your education. I do, but let me tell you what education does. Be conscious of what it does. A high school diploma means you can manage one person. A bachelor's degree means you can manage 100 people. A master's degree means you can manage 1,000. A PhD means you can manage 10,000 for the rich, not for yourself. Your education is your struggle. Use what they give you. It's the campaign, San Francisco State just got back free education. That campaign brought me and my mother out here in 1982 because she heard California give free education. And when we got here, that wasn't true. They shut the doors. Sister talked about housing, and I like the way you said what homelessness was. Because in Chico State, matter of fact, I'm going to get in at this, but St. Mary's, well, we did a social justice with all the rich folks or those who want to be rich. You know what Moraga is? They still have a red line that certain ethnic people cannot buy property there. Okay? It's through a land trust. But some people didn't understand what homelessness was. I like what you said. The extreme is sleeping under a viaduct. Anybody know what a viaduct is? Because most Californians thought I was stupid when I said a viaduct. It's an overpass. But if you look on the concrete beams, it's the word VIADUCT. But then out here, because it's unknown, they thought I was crazy when we going through the viaduct. It's like, what the fuck is that? Okay? It's a different language. But homelessness, they thought, oh, you sleeping on the tent, cold. Most people can't afford their own place to stay unless they share it with another individual. That means you're homeless. I had to educate people who co-op share, you're homeless. Because your dollars have to create a bed, you're homeless. Longshore, ILWU, the education level is from 0 to PhD. They say we make 95% more than any other blue-collar, white-collar, medium-collar worker in the United States. You can't apply for my job. I don't care what type of education you have. Because where I work for, who I work for, 81 shipping and stevedore companies. Multi-trillion-dollar industry. Larry Ellis had to deal with me. Anybody heard of the American Cup? That race? He was the only white boy that we had to change his beliefs in how these waters run. Because he was used with his millions doing stuff his way. But we told him, longshore, unload and load on these waters. And the question I asked him, because I look this way, I got locks. I'm African American. It was 15 people on our panel. I asked him a question, he turned around and answered to the white boy who had president of my local on his vest. And I called for a caucus. 15 minutes later, after I smoked, drank some coffee, we came back and sat down. And the message was, one of us asks you a question, you answer the person who opened their mouth, not who you think is in charge. Because we have one vote and one voice. and it's all together individually. Now, opposition wins. We don't give a fuck about if you race or not in these waters, because employers I work for make more money than Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and Larry Ellis put together. You don't see them on Forbes. Merck's at the height of the recession, 2009, made $45 million profit. 20,000 longshore up and down the West Coast. Our wages, I'm getting off. Our wages and benefits is less than 2% of their profit. That ain't nothing. This right here is something. Your voice, your energy, coming together to fight for what's right, you can do this. Thank you. You got my blessing and support.
I can say it, he our movement knucklehead, and we got big love for him. Okay. All right. Tara.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tara, and I just want to be transparent since everyone here on the panel was being a little transparent. I want to talk a little bit about housing security and a little bit about food insecurity. When I first started here, I started in 2013. I have been through a lot. I'm actually first generation college out of my family who's been here for 5 generations. When I first started here, I was young. I had just I barely finished high school. I ended up being homeless. A couple of little years later, after I started here, I lost my brother to gun violence in Oakland, California, and I felt like that was one of the hardest things I ever had to overcome. On top of that, I was homeless. I was sleeping in my car. I started in 2013. I was dropping in Laney, dropping out in Laney. So a few years ago, I decided that I was really gonna stick to my guns. So when I started here, I was promoted by the Umoja Ubaka Center. I'm their math tutor. I'm the Umoja Ubaka ambassador. I am also a math major and a math tutor. It's really important to me because I know a lot of people of color, especially of African American descent, struggle when it comes to math. And my goal is to transform math as a barrier to a healing pedagogy, and that's really important for me. So this semester, since 2013, I don't want to do the math, I do that a lot. I'm finally going to be graduating with my math degree and several other degrees and transferring to the UC system. So now that you know a little bit of my background, thank you, I want to quickly tell you this story. It's really important for us to think about our amendment rights and how also when people cherry pick the Bible, they also do that to our amendment rights. So when you talk about your gun rights, you talk about the Second Amendment, which is very ambiguous. You know, it's been to Supreme Court plenty of times. There's our Fifth Amendment right, which no person should be charged excessive bail. A few months ago, my younger sister, who had just turned 18, was beat almost halfway to death by the BART police. So when that happened, instead of they didn't want us to pursue a lawsuit against them, and I'm not saying all police are bad, I'm just saying sometimes some police end up in bad situations. But when that happened, they vehemently tried to come after my sister and put her away and lock her up and put her in jail. So until last month, she was fighting a case against the BART police. The BART police said that she broke her arm, the other cop's arm. She jumped in the air. She's a kangaroo, like heck of other stuff. So when it came out that they had a video cam and then we had to get the lawyers involved, they didn't want to release it, that she didn't harm the police. They were trying to give her 4 felonies, and then they dropped that, tried to give her a strike. So then they dropped that. So she finally beat the case last week. And after that case, they still charged her $10,000. And on top of that, she's $20,000 in debt from being charged excessive bail. So when we talk about our amendment rights, we also have to talk about the fact that only a certain group of people want to talk about protecting certain parts of those amendment rights. So we also have to be conscious of our amendment rights and us working together and us knowing what our rights are as people and as humans. That's really important. Thank you.
Super proud of you. So check this out. It's hard, but one of the biggest things you have to do is just understand we got half of our nation is in poverty, y'all. Half of our nation. Now, near poor, what was that number you gave, Kim? If you're few $1,000s above, then you aren't considered. But you know what the deal is, trying to make rent, pay for little Johnny, little Susie, get back and forth, child care. We understand what that deal is. And we're hurting, and mostly we're hurting individually. We have accepted the boatload of miseducation that we are the problem. We have some brokenness. I read your article, Rev. But that don't mean we the problem. Okay? So a part of this movement is to reclaim these human pieces that the young people have spoken to today. We asked Professor Felipe to come in and kind of get us zeroed in on the democracy part, because before you leave today, we want to do a small segment of your brainstorming on how we relaunch this Poor People's Campaign. You've discussed the components of it. Frankly, what you guys are doing, Keith, at ASL Seed, what you and BSU, you all are already doing components, but let's formalize that and let's put it together with this national movement. I'm going to ask Felipe if he would come. I know it's a lot of speaking, but you know, it's movement time, y'all. I don't know how else to say it. That meant a certain thing 50 years ago, but today it's about the movement of human beings getting our due and setting these corporations aside. You know, that's what it's about. So Felipe says, they didn't tell me I was supposed to talk about that. You could talk about the formalities, but I know how to politicize that, brother. So with that, I'm going to ask you if you would please come and talk to us about the subject. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Felipe Wilson. I teach political science here at Laney, and I am not going to be nearly as engaging and as good as the panelists have been, so just lower your expectations already for that. But yeah, I do want to talk just very briefly about the issue of democracy and the idea of democracy, right? We supposedly live in a democracy. But the question, I think, should be asked, do we actually live in a democracy? Like, is that really what we see around us? And so I want to just briefly talk about that idea and particularly highlight the issue of elections and money and corporations, because I think this is really where maybe our democracy is eroding the most. And it's related to one of our most fundamental rights, which is voting, and the idea that we're electing people who will listen to us. Basic idea of democracy, right? So, what is a democracy, right? Just very briefly. In theory, what is a democracy supposed to be? Well, the word actually means rule of the people, that the people have power. Like, that's literally, if you break it down into its Latin roots, what it means. People have power. People have a voice. People have an influence. The idea of majority rule is really important, meaning that the majority tends to have a larger influence than small groups of people do. Implied in that is that the government is supposed to be listening to the masses, not listening to small pockets of people or to small slivers of people, right? That's what majority rule means, and the idea that who we elect actually listen to us and actually pay attention to what we want and what our desires are. But again, I think the question is, do we actually see that happening? Is that really what reality is, or is this just merely the definition of democracy? So I think I just want to show a few slides. I won't take too much time. Some research that's been done in this area, some facts, some stats to support some of this. So I think first of all we have to look at, well, how much money is going into our elections? And again, I'm highlighting elections because voting is fundamental. That's one of our most fundamental rights. So I want to highlight the issue of money in elections, because this could be potentially very problematic. So what we have here is a chart of the cost of federal elections, right? So that's to our national government, just in Washington, D.C., not including state or local elections. What we've seen are a couple of things. One, cost of elections is rising, steadily going up. And what we also see is that in years that's a presidential election, the cost of elections is exceeding $6 billion. That's a B, not an M, $1 billion, which makes my brain hurt a little bit. When you think about how else that money could be spent, where else that money could go, what other parts of our society could use $6 billion, but instead this is going towards campaigns, elections, just at the federal level. So that alone is a little troubling. So you may be wondering, well, where is all this money coming from, right? So some of it, yes, is coming from the candidates. Some of it is coming from the political parties. But a good bit of it is coming from what we call outside groups. Outside groups are things like corporations, special interest groups, things that we call political action committees, or sometimes just called PACs. Right? These are groups that are formed solely for the purpose of trying to get people elected. And they are increasingly spending more and more money and increasingly having a larger percentage of the overall money that is being spent. You can see that the number has been escalating considerably over the last few years. So what that means is that these outside groups are spending a lot of money. And these aren't groups made up of us. These are groups made up of what we would call the 1%, right? That's where this money is coming from. And because there are more of these outside groups, there's more opportunities for the elite, the economic elite, to use their money, to use their influence, to use their power. And so what we can also see, next slide, Chris, is when we look at like the total contributions, and this one really kind of troubles me. When we look at the total contributions, people spending money, right, on people running just for Congress, 32% of the total amount being spent comes from 99% of the population. So that means 68% of all the money being spent is coming from less than 1% of the population. So that's not even the 1%, it's the 0.26%. It's the 1/4% that is spending the overwhelming majority of money for people running for office. That's shocking to think that 99% is only spending about 32% of the total amount going towards people running for office. So again, it's not the 1%, it's actually the 0.26% that tends to have a lot of influence. So those few people, and it's not that many people, spending a lot of money, right? Spending a lot of money. And so the cost of elections is going up. The average cost of a winning campaign in the House, close to $2 million. The average cost of a winning campaign in the Senate, over $10 million. So I think when you think about this, a few questions to ask yourself is, one, well, what impact does that have on who is running for office? Can anyone just run for office? Can anyone reliably in here think that you can raise $10 million? If not, you're probably not going to win a Senate seat. Can you raise $2 million every 2 years? If not, you're probably not going to win a House seat. Second question is, who do these people go to get those $10 million, those $2 million every 2 years? Well, it's the 0.26%. They're the ones spending the vast majority, so they're the ones that are having a larger influence. And then the third question is, what do they do once they get elected? Who are they listening to? Are they listening to the masses? Are they listening to the 99%? Are they listening to the majority? Or are they listening to the extremely small minority of economic elites? And that's where I think it really becomes particularly problematic. And actually move forward 2 slides, one more. Okay, so very lastly, this one's a little tricky to explain. It's political science research. So the top part of it, just to quickly explain, average citizens' preferences. So that means like a 99%, an average person. Their preferences. What would they like to see done? Right? In theory, the more people want to see something done, the more government should do it, right? They should be responding to what the people want. But you see a straight line. So what that means is that the more popular something is, tends to have absolutely no influence on whether or not that policy actually gets enacted or actually gets adopted. So even at a high level of percent, meaning really, really popular, almost no impact on whether that policy gets enacted. But then you drop down to the bottom slide there, economic elites, different story, a different line, right? So the more economic elites want something, very different story. The much more likely government is to adopt, the much more likely they are to act. These should be flipped. These should be reversed in a true democracy, right? A true democracy, you would want to see that the average citizens have that kind of influence. That would be majority rule. That is not what we see, right? That is not, unfortunately, what happens. So 2 more slides again. 1 more. So, just to wrap up, some thoughts on what can we do about all this. The system is broken. There's no question about that. The system is broken. So what can we do? A couple of things, just a couple of quick thoughts. One, I think awareness is incredibly important. To know about this, to understand this, and also to know who your politicians are and who's backing them, who's supporting them, where are they getting their money from? And if you're wondering, well, how would I possibly know that? Well, there's a website called opensecrets.org. It's a nonpartisan, unbiased website that just keeps track of all the campaign money that's being spent. Who's spending it, where is it going, and how might it be influencing people in government? You can look up every elected politician to see where they're getting their money from, because all of this is publicly available information. And you can also see what issues they tend to be supporting, and maybe how that might be influenced by where they're getting their money from. So govtrack.us is where you can track every bill, every policy, everything that government does. And you can see how your elected official is voting. You can see what they are doing, what they are saying, what they are initiating in Congress, how they are voting, I think is very important, that awareness piece of it. And then persistence, right? Persistence. Some of the research has shown that we tend to get real fired up about something, and then it diminishes over time, right? The gun control issue is an example. After a school shooting, we're really riled up about that. It's very, very important, right, to us. We're very passionate about it. But what about 2 weeks after the gun shooting? What happens about 2 weeks after is we tend to see that intensity die down. So I think it's important to think about not only how do we get angry about something, but how do we sustain that? Because government moves slowly, and you're never going to see anything change really quickly. So there has to be endurance. There has to be persistence. And so I think thinking about how do we do that, how do we build persistence into our movements is incredibly important. And then lastly, making some informed electoral choices. When you go to the voting booth, when you cast your vote, know who you're voting for. Know who they are more than just the name. Who supports them, right? Where's the money coming from? So hopefully this has given you just a little bit of an idea of the influence of money, the influence of corporations, the influence that they have, and how that has diminished our power. But if I can leave with just one last thought is, I think we're a very flawed democracy, but I do think we are still a democracy with a lot of problems, but there's opportunity. There's opportunity there that doesn't exist in many other countries. We have to take advantage of that. We have to make sure that our voices get heard. It's going to take a while, and persistence, endurance are necessary, but if we work together, we can absolutely make change happen, and we can make our voices heard. Okay, so thank you for that. Appreciate the time.
I knew we needed you. Thank you so much. Okay, folks, so we have two other components we want to do. We want to transition to thinking about, so that solutions issue that Lakeisha was talking with us about, and the part that both Kimberly King also talked about, that the importance of us supporting the relaunching of a movement, a Poor People's Campaign, which is actually a part of what Felipe leaves us with is, so we know we have these political parties over there, and they actually aren't serving our needs, but we also have something called movements, which movements can and should be about the place where we're formulating, I'm sorry I didn't get your name, sir, but we're formulating both the problems as well as the solutions as a class of people. And one of the things that we really wanted to not shy away from in this discussion was the position of the dispossessed and marginalized. Because in our country, we lie about that. We pretend that that's only an issue that exists, quote unquote, overseas. But frankly, the fact that we have so many families, men and women, children, just take a stroll through some of the tent city encampments. Whole families are living there because they have no other housing. And this is not only in Oakland. It's just that it's most recently visited our city. So one of the things we want to do is give you a little bit from this gentleman who is the architect of something initially called Moral Mondays. Anybody in here ever heard of Moral Mondays? Just raise your hand. Raise your hand if you had. So many of you are not raising your hand, so that tells me maybe that's a new piece of information for you. Very important, because this brother has been doing that work for about 10 years in North Carolina, similar to the kind of work that Rev has been doing in Benton Harbor. And we're trying to pull these different lessons together. How do we fight more effectively for our rights? So I'm going to ask if he'll show that video, and then I want you to think about, we have one question we want the small groups to do together, and we want you to meet for about 10, 15 minutes, and then come back and talk with us about what you, Rev will help close it up for us. So let me ask Chris if he will play that. Listen real closely. Remember, this is about that transition to what did they do effectively in North Carolina to build a movement for justice, and that now they're trying to expand all over the country.
Remember, this is not the first time America has had to deal with a racist president. This is not the worst thing we've ever seen. To say that would be to disregard the trail of tears that natives face and slavery. But when you know history, you know that's not the only side of our American history either. There's another place in our descent, our moral DNA, and that is people have always stood up. Number one, if you're going to change America, you got to change it from state houses up. The Koch brothers came down to the state houses, and that's where they got their power. The worst laws about voting and living wage and education happen in state legislature. Secondly, you have to build a new language to pull people together, because left and right automatically sets people apart. So the way we did it, we had Moral Monday as a rallying point every Monday. Issue focused. For 10 years, North Carolina had been trying to raise the minimum wage, had not been successful. But when we came together, black and white and Latino, Jew and Christian and Muslim and Hindu, people of faith, people not of faith, gay and straight, Republicans and Democrats around this moral agenda, and we stopped talking left and right and liberal versus conservative, but morally defensible, we won. You have to be able to hold race and class together. Sometimes progressives say, let's find a way to cut across race. You have to cut into it. You can't say race or class, it's race and class. Lastly, you have to have a legal strategy where we're willing to dust off the Constitution and fight against unconstitutional laws. And you have to build a movement, not a moment, not one rally, not one tweet, not one letter. The Moral Monday movement set the framework of showing that in the South, you can organize black and white and brown people. You can bring them together when you reframe the issues around the Constitution, around morality, and around what is economically just, and you can win. So I believe that All of these movements from Moral Monday to Fight 15, as I've said, Black Lives Matter, on and on and on, are signs of hope that people are going to stand up and not stand down. That people are saying standing down is not an option. If we were able to beat back slavery, if we were able to beat back Jim Crow, if women were able to win the right to vote, then maybe this is just our time. And from that standpoint, I'm glad to be alive, and glad to be alive with so many others who say we will never give up on the heart of this democracy. We are going to be the moral defibrillators of our time and shock the heart of this nation and build a movement of resistance and hope and justice and love.
Okay, so now we got Chris, if you'll help me just put the question that now, because this gentleman is leading this effort, but a lot of people getting tripped up with, well, can we trust him? And I'm like, you know what? It ain't about the dude. Right. It's about what the movement's done. And yeah, we gotta have accountability. But right now, we're suffering individually as slaves, and all we have is distrust amongst each other.
Absolutely.
So if we can begin to figure out how do we change this narrative, and I'm gonna point back to those children in Florida who are changing the narrative.
Yes.
I think that begins to point for us, because they're changing, they're learning that this isn't only just a legislative thing, it's a political thing. And they don't even have the right to vote yet. Great, because that means they can't even be corrupted yet. That means that's on us, all us old heads up in here who are over 21 and can vote. That means it's on us.